everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. In my last video, I turned a skirt sloper into a pant sloper. So now with both bottoms done, I thought we might as well do a bodice sloper because then we can really make whatever style we want. So for each of these slopers, I've been trying to make it easier and easier. So now for the bodice sloper, which is probably the most complicated, let's just make it super easy by finding a really good one online. So I went hunting and I found BlueHours Atelier, and they have loads of good information, and they have a bodice and sleeve sloper that is, I think, very well designed according to your measurements. So they give good instructions on their website about how to take your measurements. I'm going to go through that with you right now and how to choose the correct size sloper for you. Then I'm going to cut mine out of a muslin and sew it up and make any necessary corrections. That way, I'm going to have my whole complete set of slopers. So if that sounds good to you, then you're going to need a tape measure, a printer, and a sharp pencil, and muslin, and pins, and a sewing machine. So we're going to start with just a few key measurements. And I've had people ask me to show how to measure properly, and that is really, really important. So let's do that right now. You're going to need 3 different bust measurements. The high bust, which you just take under your arms, like above the bust line, and make a note of that. Don't just try to remember these. Definitely write that down. And at the BlueHours Atelier website, they do use inches. And so if you're European, you'll have to do the conversion from centimeters to inches. Apologies to anybody who definitely prefers the metric system. Okay, so you've got your high bust and then full bust. You want your tape measure to be parallel to the floor, and you're measuring right around the fullest point of the bust. And make a note of that one. Then it's the under bust. And again, make sure the tape measure is parallel to the floor. That really, I don't know why, especially on this one, on the under bust, that can make a big difference to your measurement. So make sure it's parallel to the floor and make a note. Then you want your waist. And the waist measurement is the smallest part around your waist. So get that tape measure to kind of slip into where you're smallest. Good. And then the last one is your hip, and that I find is easier. Turn your side to the mirror or to your friend who's measuring for you, and you want to get the fullest part around the hip. So you want to get the fullest part around the hip there. And again, the tape measure should be parallel to the floor. So even though we're doing just the bodice, the hip measurement does come into play because it is like the longer bodice, not just to the waist. So the high bust is going to be the size that you print off. If you're 36 in the high bust, you choose size 36. If you're 38, you choose size 38, right? But then she has each of the different cup sizes as well. So you need to figure that out. So to figure out your cup size, you're going to take that full bust measurement and subtract the under bust. And it's written on the website, but basically if your full bust is 2 inches bigger than your under bust, you're a B cup. If it's 3 inches, you're a C cup. If it's 4 inches, you're a D cup. And if it's 5 inches, you're an E cup, and so on. So if you've ever used a PDF pattern before, you know that you have to print off all the little sheets and then tape them together. And then it does not include seam allowance, which is actually helpful because what we're going to do is we'll include bigger seam allowances so that we have some wiggle room to do our fitting with. So I think this is going to work out well. I think we'll be able to get a really well-fitted bodice pattern with minimal effort. This is the BlueHours Atelier website. She does lots of different things here, but we are most interested in the tutorials. She's got 2 different tutorials, bra fitting, but this is the one we want. Sloper basics and how to adjust them to your measurements. So first of all, she goes into what is a sloper. And this is definitely something I should be explaining. A sloper is, she calls it a fitting shell. And that's a good way to put it. To me, it's a basic pattern block that you can use to make any design from. Traditionally, this is true. Slopers don't include seam allowances, but for me, I do prefer to keep a sloper that does have seam allowance. It just saves me from adding it every time I change the design. Choosing a sloper, she goes into here, taking all of your measurements. So we've already discussed the horizontal ones, but you can take your vertical measurements as well. After you've printed your sloper, then you can use those vertical measurements to make adjustments that way. You can either make yours longer by dividing it or make it shorter by overlapping it. She also shows how to make an adjustment to raise or lower a bust point. So after kind of looking through that tutorial, then come over to patterns, the woven bodice sloper patterns. And it's important to note the woven part, right? This is for fabric that does not stretch. You do need to treat it completely different if you are doing something for a stretch fabric. So this is the tutorial we were just looking at. And then you're going to come down to the bottom here, looking for the separate sizes. Once you're in the sloper patterns, you can just scroll down and then here we are. So it's based on the high bust measurement and the cup size. Once you have figured out your measurements there, you'll just scroll down to find your size. The sizes go up to 48D. If you're over 48D, then my apologies. I wish that this did have a bigger size range, but maybe in a future video, I will do making your own sloper according to your own measurements. 48D is the only one where this test square is not on page 16. For everybody except a 48D person, you're going to just want to print page 16 first. And it prints off this sheet with the test square, and that test square should come out to being 3 inches square. If you are 48D, then you want to print page 21. When I printed mine, even though I had selected just the one size, it came out like this, all of the patterns in one. And so I had a difficult time trying to print it. So I used the contact button and I emailed BlueHours Atelier. They got back to me right away and explained the process of printing. To make this print properly, I had to download it. And then if I just tried printing from Acrobat Reader, for me, it just would not print. It just said nothing was available. I don't know. So instead, I opened with Preview. And then once it opened in Preview, then I could go ahead and choose Print. First, I just printed page 16 though, to make sure that everything that I was doing worked, because page 16 has the test square on it, which should come out to be 3 inches. So that worked out perfectly with what I'm about to show you. So I left all of that alone. And then here I moved to scale. It defaults to 108%. So I'm just changing that to 100%. And then that worked. And it fits together well when you tape it together. But I think I am going to add seam allowance before I cut this out in muslin. And so I think I'm going to add 1 inch to all of the straight areas and then just 1/2 inch to the armhole and neckline. So with my see-through ruler, it's just nice and easy. Just put that 1 inch line on the sewing line. Now for me, my waist does not nip in like that. So I think I'm going to add on an extra 1/2 inch on the waist and then add on my inch. And I'll show you how to fold that dart in a second. And maybe I don't need to add anything to the bottom because it is already quite long. The 1/2 inch line goes on the edge here, but I want to have a right angle. And I just shuffle the ruler along so that wherever I'm tracing, I'm getting the 1/2 inch. Good, so that's everywhere except this dart. So to fold in this dart, I'm going to do, first of all, 2 folds. One straight across the point of the dart, and then one on the lower arm. This is how I'm going to be able to get the nice peak. So 1 fold there, open it out, and then fold the lower arm. Open it out again, come back to that first fold, and then close up my dart. Let's bring that together. Nice. Okay, I just want to true this line, just make sure that is connecting well. I'm going to tape that closed. Okay, so now I'll cut out that outside edge, and then when I cut right through that dart and then open it, I'll have the proper peak. There you go, there's the peak of the dart. And then I can just cut out everything else just on my new red line. And I'll need some overlap to be able to close up the front, so I'm just going to leave that extra paper there. That will be fine. Just before I cut, I want to give myself notches, and so I'll extend that arm of the dart out to the side there, this one to here, and I'll extend that notch out. And then I think that's it. The same process on the back, but I won't have that dart to deal with. On the back though, I've got the shoulder dart, but I'll deal with it in exactly the same way. It's just smaller. One fold across the point of the dart, and then a fold on the arm of the dart that's closer toward the center. Basically, the rule of darts is that if they're vertical, darts press toward the center. And if they're horizontal, they press down. So if this is going to be pressing toward the center, it's this edge that comes over, right? So that's why I'm folding on the arm that's closer to the center here, where I folded on the horizontal one in the front. I folded it first on that lower edge because it has to come up, so that the dart ends up pressing down. And that edge fits together now. If I did it the other way and press it up, that peak is going to stick out funny, right? So it goes that way. So now folding on the edge that's closer to the center, good, and bringing that closed again. So there won't be much of a peak on here because it's quite a small dart. So not really any peak at all there. It's more or less straight across. I'm just going to keep that inch along that center back. I will do a seam on the center back, but I can always place this edge on the fold anytime I want to. So I think for fitting purposes, I will keep that inch of seam allowance on the back. Not really there to be seam allowance, but I'm going to use it that way. 2 notches means back, so I can just look at my pieces and know that this is the back. However, those 2 notches are really, really close together. So I'm going to use that as 1, and I'll put a second notch, maybe 3/8 of an inch, about a centimeter up from that. And same thing for notches to indicate the darts, just following the arm of the dart up. Okay. And now also, since I'm not used to sewing with an inch seam allowance, I might forget. And so I'm going to give myself a notch to indicate my seam allowance as well. That'll do. And I will do the same thing on the front. Just that little notch to indicate my seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm going to cut this out, and you can use muslin or a bed sheet or any fabric you have that's old and ugly. Like, it doesn't have to be beautiful, and we're going to be sewing this together in a way that doesn't have to be beautiful. We're not going to be doing any seam finishing, nothing special. We will be sewing the darts all closed and then just sewing the side seams and the shoulder seams and the center back seam, and then be able to try it on. Okay, so I found this old bed sheet that I'm cutting my front and back bodice out of. You can use muslin or an old bed sheet, anything really, as long as it's not stretchy. It can't have any stretch at all. I did a couple things that I wanted to show you. I ended up cutting the dart right out of the paper so that I could just draw those long darts right onto the fabric. And then I wish I could remember who I saw that recommended this. Somebody on YouTube recommended doing that. I didn't want to remove the whole dart because I want to cut out that peak properly, right? But I cut down one arm. I don't think it matters which arm, and then folded it back on the other arm so that, again, you can just draw the dart right on. Now, that's not how I mark a dart when I'm actually sewing a real garment, but for this, I think it's kind of perfect. The same up on that shoulder dart too. I'll just be able to fold that back and draw that. So I used a rotary cutter to cut, but I'll use scissors to snip the notches. You never want to cut notches with a rotary cutter because you will always go too far. So she says that she doesn't even sew the sloper to begin with. She just does a pin fitting, pinning the darts and the seams. And so let's do that next. So I'm pinning down the center back at that 1 inch mark. Now I find when I'm pinning something to try on, I have to put a lot of pins, because if you don't have enough pins, then it makes it seem artificially large. You know, there's more room in between, like it opens up more. And so you can get tricked into thinking that something fits when it's too small. So a lot of pins, especially on these major vertical seams. And of course I had to flip my pattern over to trace those darts on both wrong sides. So I would normally just jump right into sewing, but I'm going to do what she says to do, which is do your pin test first. So I'm trying to make my pin hit that line on both sides. And it takes quite a few pins to do this whole test. I better make sure I get right up into the point of those darts. So here's an example to see how that dart is opening up because I just don't have enough pins in there. And here too, like that's going to make me think it's fitting when it might end up being too small once it's sewn. Okay, so I'm going to finish pinning this whole thing together and then I'll show you when I'm trying it on. Okay, the pin test is in progress and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I think that the size was the right size. It is a little bit big over the bust, but I think once I got a sleeve in there, I would want that room. So I'm not going to take it away yet. I think I will try this after I sew this up. I will try the sleeve. And then I think that that room is going to just make like a shirt more comfortable, but I can always take it out later if I want to. The two main adjustments I'm making are, I think that these vertical darts are just too close to the center for me. I'm going to move them 1/2 inch out toward the side, and it was a little bit small over the hip for me. So I want to make sure that I get that full inch seam allowance pinned down the front. Even if it's tight, that's not where I want to make the adjustment. So where I made the adjustment is at the side seam. I just pinned only like about 1/2 inch in on the sides, and I took a little bit, I made the darts a little skinnier too, so I'm taking away less fabric at the dart. I wish one of you would run over right now and help me pin the back. I think it's okay, but it would be great if you could help me out with that. If it tends to ride up, if it's riding up and you're pulling it down, that means it's too small. And the part that's too tight is trying to find a smaller area on your body. So if the hip is too small, it's gonna ride up and bunch up. So if you're doing that a lot, pulling it down, smoothing it down, it just means it needs to be released a little bit over the hip. What you're checking for here is that the shoulder is sitting nice, that it's kind of coming to a good point. And again, I think this is fine for when we add in the sleeve. So I'm not going to make any adjustments there. I think that's fine. But you can see here probably what I mean, that I think the vertical dart should just be 1/2 inch out. These ones are fine. So that's pretty good. That's pretty minor adjustment. All right, so just to be sure though, I am going to just sew this as I've got it pinned before I make any adjustments to the pattern. Okay, it's all sewn up now and it's a lot more comfortable since it's not full of pins. But you can see I moved the dart over 1/2 inch and I think that sits better. I've raised it up and made it just skinnier here, right? So I'm taking out less fabric there. So I think it sits much better. I still don't really know about this. I don't think I'll know for sure until I try it with a sleeve. But I think that that's pretty darn good. See the small of my back here? I don't need to take it in there, right? I don't need to do any fitting along that center back seam. That tells me that I don't have to cut two of the back. I can easily cut it on the fold, not have a seam here, and not need it as a point of fitting. So that's fine. Well, that's exciting. So I think my muslin is ready. I'm going to make these changes to the pattern. So I've taped in paper back into that dart, and I've taped some onto the side seam where I think I will be needing to add a little bit there. So first of all, the dart, I want to move it over 1/2 inch. So I'm going to draw a vertical line. I'm putting my 1/2 inch line on both points of the original dart. So this is my new vertical line for my new dart. And then it's going to start at the same place. And even the width at the center was fine. So I'll call that 1.5 inches. So 3/4 inch on each side. But now I want it shorter. Let's call that 1.25 inches shorter. Okay, so that is my new dart. Okay, that's easy. To figure out the side seam now, I think I just need to fold across the point of the dart so that I can close that up easily. And I'm just pinning right through the whole thing. So now I'll lay the muslin back on top, line up my edge. So I'm putting the edge of the muslin on the original edge of the pattern piece. And now I'm going to just trace my new sewing line. this is the pointed tracing wheel, or we call it the killer wheel. It just leaves that little line of dots. So this is a good chance for us to talk about why we use darts, right? This paper is two-dimensional, just like fabric. Fabric has a little bit more drapiness than paper, but it's essentially the same thing. And when we pin out a dart, we turn that two-dimensional piece into a three-dimensional piece to conform to the body. Working in paper helps you to understand the whole concept of why we use darts. So now, this dotted line is my new sewing line, and I want to have 1/2 inch seam allowance. I don't want the full inch anymore here or on the shoulder. I'm going to just go down to the 1/2 inch now. Good. So I might not have needed the extra paper, but maybe. And I want the dart closed up for this so that I get the correct peak again. This has to be folded in like that. So I did not need the extra paper down here. So it looks like I'm taking it in at the top, but I'm not. I'm just reducing the seam allowance. There, and my peak is still good. And I'm just going to go down to 1/2 inch seam allowance on the shoulder as well. So the front is done. And then to make the back the same, I'm just laying the front on top of it. And really, nothing has changed in this whole section because I'm just using up that extra seam allowance. So it's only the top. I'm just making a nicer blend there. So this is confusing. I'm even confused. It feels like the only part I'm making a change to is the top part. But really, the part that I'm making a change to is the bottom. I'm taking that extra seam allowance off everywhere except the bottom because that's where I needed the extra fabric. Make sense? Okay, so that notch is no longer correct. Everything else is. Okay. Oh, and then I think I will just make this back piece on the fold. So I'll cut off that extra seam allowance on the back. Okay, so this now becomes a bracketed arrow because this piece is place on fold. Good. So there we go. My bodice sloper is done, and I might as well do the sleeve. Okay, so the sleeve is printed and taped together, and then I noticed how ginormously long that sleeve is. My arms are not long, and a commercial pattern is usually about 1.25 inches too long for me. But this sleeve is about 3 inches too long for me. And so now that I've got it all taped together, I'm going to untape the horizontal seams here. Because remember, this has no seam allowance. So this is like the size of the finished sleeve. And it's 24 3/4 inch long. That is some long arms. So I'll separate out the horizontal seams again. And then I'm going to draw a new line 1.5 inches above that original horizontal line. And slide my sleeve up. I want to match up the vertical lines, not the size. Those will vary, right? I'll have to true those after. But I just want to make sure I'm sliding it up in line. I'm not drifting from one side to another. So I'm taking out 1.5 inches from above the elbow dart and 1.5 inches below the elbow dart. Good. Now that looks more like my kind of sleeve. And that gives me a finished sleeve length of 21.5, which comes right down to here for me. So now I just need to smooth out that line. Like that. And like that. Adding on the second notch the same way I did on the armhole. And extending those notches out. And then dealing with that dart in the same way. So it's horizontal, right? So that means the back is going to press down. So that means I want to bring the front up. So first fold goes across the point. Second fold is the lower edge of the dart. Then I can close up the dart and then cut. And there's my small peak. And now I'm going to cut it out of the bed sheet, and I'm just going to do one sleeve. You only really have to fit one. I do want to make sure it's on the straight of grain because cutting it on the bias will make it more flexible than it truly is. So now I'm ready to cut this. Snip my notches without snipping through the paper, just so I don't dull the point of my scissors. I forgot to extend those notches out for the dart. That's that. And I just need to mark the point of the dart, so I'm going to fold it right there. And I just need a point. As long as I can see my two notches here and the point, that's really all I need. Bring the two notches together, fold them right toward that point. Good. Okay, so I'm going to sew this sleeve up and set it into the muslin. So the sleeve is all sewn, and you know what? You might wonder, why is there a dart in the elbow? And that is sort of common practice for a fitted sleeve. If you make changes to the sleeve and make it more full, then you can get rid of the elbow dart. But it is normal in a fitted sleeve to have a dart so that you've got room in the elbow to bend. Alrighty, so now to put this in. So I want to bring seam to seam, single notch to single notch. So I've got the sleeve going into the correct side. Good. And I checked, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of ease. In fact, very little ease, which is probably also a good idea for a sloper. You can add in ease according to the style that you want. If you want that sleeve to sit up tall, you add in more ease. You also add in ease for comfort. And the top notch goes to the shoulder seam and pushing the seam allowance to the back, or you can do open. There's basically no ease in this sleeve at all. Ease meaning extra fabric. Usually the sleeve is bigger than the armhole and you have to ease the sleeve in, but this is just going in even Steven. Okay, I'll sew that in and then try it on. Okay, so the sleeve is in and it's pretty good, but I'm thinking to take out a little dart like that in here. I feel like there's just a little extra fabric right in this area. When I'm looking in the camera, it looks pretty good, but it is just a little bit of excess there. I can take out a little dart like this so that I'll be removing fabric from the armhole, but not actually ending up with a dart here. It's just a little bit of dart manipulation that I can show you. Now, the other thing that I'm not loving about the sleeve is these lines, the way it's hanging there. You can see that this sort of wants to come down here. Like, I wish I could pull that down. So I'm going to do a little cut. So do you see that? This cap height wants 1 more inch just in the cap height. So that's not a bad little alteration that I can do either. Now the sleeve length is good. I'm really glad I took out those 3 inches, but I'm going to show you how I can make that change, which I know is a bit crazy and definitely shows why you want to use muslin, not good fabric. And maybe on this view you can see that extra that I'm talking about here. So hopefully this little dart takes care of this problem, and then we'll take care of that. Let's do those 2 little alterations. Okay, so this is the dart that I want to take out of the underarm. I want to manipulate the original dart to encompass that one. So that sounds scarier than it is. I'm just going to mark what I've got going on here for the dart, the 2 ends of the dart and the point. Taking this out is going to be much easier if I just bring it up like that, sort of slide it so that it's coming out to the point of the dart. So here we go. I want to take out 5/8 of an inch from the underarm, and I want to make it go to the point. I'm just going to mark that here, 5/8 of an inch over. So this is the new dart that I want to take out. However, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to close that up and let this one open up more. So I'll cut and just leave a little connection there, a little bridge. So that's what I have right now, but I want to take out that extra fullness under the arm. So I'll bring that over, tape that down. Now this dart has just grown and my armhole has become smaller. So then I just need to true the line here, and I think I'll tape on new paper. So then that affects my peak of my dart. So I need to fix that. That's kind of a big dart now, but I think that's better. So the amount that I took out, that 5/8, is coming out below the notch. But when you ease in a sleeve, you want all of the ease above the notch. You don't want any ease coming in under the arm. So I'm going to move that notch 5/8 up so that this measurement stays the same. And then that gives me a little bit more ease in the top of the sleeve. Remember I was saying that there really wasn't any? So that just built in a little bit of ease there. But this does look a little crazy. I think I better cut out a new front and try that again. But now let's take on the sleeve. So where I cut, I could have even cut a little bit higher, but basically where I cut was about here. So that is 3 3/8 above this line. And this line isn't significant, but it just is giving me a way to make it level. And then down the center. Just want to find the center of the sleeve here. I come into the notch. Okay, I've just drawn a line where I cut, and then from that line up to the top of the sleeve. I'm going to snip in here and cut the pattern in the same way that I cut the sleeve. And I'll leave a little bit of a join there. And no join here. So now that is how I can add ease to the sleeve, length in here, width in there. So that width adds ease to the top of the sleeve. This adds height to the cap, and that should be good. This might be giving me too much ease. I think I'll go a little less because you have to be able to sew it in smoothly. I think that looks about good. So these notches stay the same. Good. And then my new notch is right in the center there. So that's my new sleeve. So before I recut my sleeve and front out of muslin to try them again, I'm going to just check because I'm a bit worried that this might end up with too much ease, especially since I took that extra bit out of the front armhole there. So I'm going to show you what's called walking your pattern together, sewing in paper, sometimes called. So this is the front armhole. I'm just going to kind of compare it to the front of the sleeve. And I just need a pencil to kind of walk them together. So if I start together here, the edges fall into place together until this point. So I put my pencil there and then tip there together until this point. So you just keep tipping your pattern pieces until the edges come together. Place your pencil as far along as you can when they're still together. Okay, so this notch of the shoulder seam comes to that point there. So just even that much on the front, that's a lot of ease. I'll check the back though. There's my double notch on the back, and they fall into place there. The double notch meets up, that's good. You can see my pattern is getting a little Frankenstitched. Alrighty, and then my shoulder notch comes to here, this little notch at the seam allowance. So the amount of ease is what I have between my pencil marks here, which is about 2 inches. That's too much. I want to keep the height that I've added, and I want a little bit of ease, like 1 inch maximum. You can have varying amounts of ease depending on your fabric, how well it eases. Some fabrics just don't, but some ease very, very nicely. So this is the area that I took the fold out of the front armhole, and I can decrease the ease just by taking off some of the height of the sleeve too. I think that the sleeve will sit better with that height. I don't really want to just take away that height, but I want to decrease the ease on the front part of the sleeve. So I'm kind of playing around with the placement of these two pieces, trying to get them to land with a good overlap here. If I have to lose the height here, that is okay. So I think about like that will do better. So it's just lowering the front, which I think will be okay. This is a little unorthodox, but I think it's going to be fine. And I'll test it out, and if it's not fine, I'll fix it. Another thing I could do to reduce the ease is I could take a fold just out of the front section and bring it to nothing at the bottom. The reason I'm hesitating there is because then I'm losing width from the lower part of the sleeve, right? Not a lot, but maybe enough that it would bother me. I don't know. But if this doesn't work, that's what I will end up doing, taking that fold out of the front part of the sleeve. All right, so now I will recut my front and sleeves and give this another try. So I ended up cutting a whole new muslin and I think it's working. So I've got the sleeve set in, but there is quite a lot of ease in the sleeve now. Even with that little adjustment where I took out some, that would have been way too much if I hadn't done that. But right now it's looking not too bad. So because there is quite a bit of ease, meaning that the sleeve is quite a bit bigger than the armhole, I ran a gathering stitch or an ease stitch, and that is just a regular straight stitch but with a stitch length of 5 or whatever your maximum is. Don't do back tacks and don't cut your thread short. Just like we're gathering, except we're not exactly gathering. So there's my center notch. That would normally sit right there at the seam, but that gives me a lot more ease still at the front. So I'm going to just slide that notch back about 1/2 inch. And what that does is a couple good things. One is that it evens up the ease. The second is that by tipping the sleeve back like that, we end up bringing the sleeve kind of hanging more toward the front. So that reduces those drag lines. If you can imagine your sleeve tipping down like that, it's going to make drag lines, right? When you tip the top toward the back, it makes the sleeve hang nicer, especially like on a fitted, like tailored sleeve like this. The sleeve isn't super skinny, but it's tailored. Okay, so that evens up my ease a little bit more. So let's see, I'm just going to pull one thread. I don't even really think of pulling the thread. I think about just holding the thread and shuffling the fabric along it, and just enough so that it fits. This is one of those times where pins are definitely better than clips, because where I'm pinning, I want to pin it right at my sewing line. And so clips hold the edge, but I want to hold together the sewing line, right? The edge can be wiggly like that and ripply, and that's fine, but it's the sewing line that I want to be smooth. I don't want any little puckers to show up in there. And this is a heavier muslin than what I was using before, and it's not a big fan of easing, but I think I can persuade it. You just don't want any little puckers. Lots of pins, always with the head of the pin sticking up when you're setting a sleeve. Okay, I will sew around that and then I will show you. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much there. I feel like you could just keep tweaking your own muslin till you drive yourself crazy, but I think it's pretty good right now. I'm pretty happy with it. You can see that this armhole is sitting so much nicer now. It's a lot less gapey and it's still very comfortable. So I'm happy with that. And then when I set the new sleeve in, it's sitting nicely. I'm not getting quite so much of those lines that I was, right? And I still have room for movement. And so I think that's pretty good. So when I cut this second muslin, I didn't put the seam down the back, and I think that's just fine. The back seems to be fitting nicely. I could maybe still do a little bit of tweaking through the body, but overall, it's pretty darn good. I don't know if you started by drafting just from your own measurements. I don't know how much less tweaking you'd have to do. Do you know what I mean? I think that you just need a starting point, whether you draft it yourself or you use the sloper from BlueHours Atelier. Either way, it's a starting point and then you do your tweaking. So once you have your bodice that fits nicely, then you can design whatever you want. I could turn this into a strapless bodice. I could turn it into a blazer, either taking out some fabric or adding some fabric and just playing around with the contour, doing some dart manipulation, changing the shape. Like from here, you can go anywhere. Every person's tweaks are going to be different, right? So what I'm going to do is recommend 2 books for you. One of the books is this one, Fitting for Every Figure, and that's from Threads magazine at Taunton Press. This is a really great book. It has lots of good fitting information, and it is actually recommended by BlueHours Atelier as well. In their instructions, you'll see that they recommend this book for helping you to do your tweaking. But the one that I kind of grew up using is this one from Reader's Digest, The Complete Guide to Sewing. I really love this book. This one's really old, so I did make sure that it is still available on Amazon, and it looks quite different, but I could peek through some of the pages and it still has the good information that I really like from this book. All the different kinds of fitting scenarios and everything that will help you make your tweaks to your muslin. So the links to those 2 books will be in the description. Just click where it says more below this video and that takes you to all of my links. So I hope you find that helpful and at least interesting. And I think if I ever launch a course, that would give me the freedom to go more deeply into drafting that sloper set from scratch. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. I've been pondering launching a course. Let me know if you think that would be something that's helpful to you. Okay, so I think that's it for today. And until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care.